should be almost ready to go. Perfect. All right, Hannah just got here. Okie dokie. All right. I'm just trying to make sure we get our live stream all set up. I'll be with you in just one moment. Okay, this looks good. All right. Hannah, are you able? Perfect. So just so everyone knows, if you want to keep your chat button open, this will be a little bit more of an interactive discussion. Obviously, it is pretty brave of everyone to be here and want to host a group. A bunch of us have been doing it for a while, and so we do expect a few questions, and we're happy to answer them. There are a few things that we want to go through first. So Hannah, I'll ask if it's okay if you'd share your video with the group. Perfect. Hey there, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing very well. How are you?
Good. It's been such a long day of all this programming, so I'm glad we're at least setting aside some time to go ahead and talk about how to actually host a group, because it can get really tricky and it can be frustrating. So the first thing that we're going to do is go over some of the 7, we consider them 7, but obviously there are much more involved. So the guidelines for starting and maintaining a peer support group. And right out the gate, someone might say, what does that mean? And so a peer support group is someone with a BFRB, in our case, who is hosting a group for other people with BFRBs, meaning that there's no therapist or facilitating doctor present. And pretty much beyond that, it's up to you. So a message from TLC, we are definitely huge into promoting people. I'm the person who you would be in touch with if you wanted to start a support group. I see we have a few people in attendance who I know, so hello to all of you. We're really supportive in helping you start a support group, but we do want to make sure that you understand the work that it takes to start one. So we're going to take you, again, we're going to take you through some of the steps that you should consider and take if you do. We're happy to help post your group description on our website, send out alerts and post on social media to try to get the neighboring states or cities, towns near you aware of the fact that you've started a group. So even though it might be slow in the beginning, just wait and give it a little bit of time. It does require patience, which sometimes can run a little low in all of us. So let's just jump in and start with, what are the steps So one, I always like to start off with this question, but are you ready to start a group? And you may think, yeah, I'm totally gung-ho and this is something I'm ready to do. But are you really ready? Not just to be a leader, but also to carry the responsibility of holding space for other people. And it can get really frustrating. So are you ready? Do you actually have time, like in your schedule, to make time for something like this? Do you have time to invest, to go out and promote your group to your town or your city? It does take a lot. One thing I realized, I think it's just because I've been introducing other people, is that I forgot to introduce myself and let Hannah introduce herself too. So I'll take a pause. My name is Amy and I work with TLC. I've been hosting and running support groups since 2008. And I currently work as one of the support group leader mentors for TLC. And so many thanks to all of them for mentoring everyone who emails in and says, I want to do something. What can I do? How do I start a support group in my area? And Hannah, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
I'm Hannah. I'm the Atlanta BFRB peer support group leader. I started that group 2.5 years ago. I also work with the kids and teens support group as a facilitator, and also I've been helping out with the adult TLC BFRB online group. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for being here to help me. It's not easy to do these types of things alone. So going back to what I was saying, are you ready? So some of these questions that you might want to ask yourself are you ready to move? Are you starting a new semester that might be stressful? Do you have any major life events coming up? Are you coping with a lot of stress at the moment? Sometimes it might seem like taking on other tasks will distract you and give you something else to do, but it may end up becoming a little too overwhelming and anxiety can become insurmountable. So just check in with yourself and see, is this feasible? Do I have X number of hours a week to support in launching a new group? And again, we'll go into a little bit later the differences between hosting an in-person and an online group. In general, running an online group has its own pros and cons, but neither one is, better than the other. So, okay. So you've decided that you're ready to start a group. That's great. Choosing a format for the group. So whenever I mentor new people, we usually follow the same format that we host in our online support groups and the ones that I host in my home in San Francisco. And that's where we get everyone together. And I, as the facilitator, read the rules, or call it the spiel. So I read the rules. And again, like TLC can provide you with a base template for some of these rules. Other groups, it might be much easier just to have it printed out on a piece of paper. That way you can not have to come off with things at the top of your head and just have a document that that you can read on. It's a little bit more reliable. It takes off some of the initial pressure of hosting. So read through the rules, make sure that everyone's in agreement, and then everyone starts to check in. So we do a series of check-ins because we do want to hear how the last week, how the last month, how the last period of time it's been since we saw you last or heard from you last, how it's been going. And it's always tricky, but based on the size of your group, you kind of have to give a little bit of a preamble. Obviously there's a lot of us here. So, we want to keep our check-ins a little bit brief because everyone wants to share during the meat of the discussion, which comes after check-in. So, keep your check-ins related, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, tangentially related to BFRBs. I know that, obviously outside life pressures can happen, and, going through a breakup, for example, can be pretty salient for a lot of people, but let's try to talk about not just that situation, but how it's impacted your picking, pulling, biting, things like that. So choosing a format for the group after check-in, we have what's called open discussion. By the way, it's pretty worthy to note that during check-ins, we don't crosstalk. So if I was checking in about my day and Hannah was like, oh, I saw that movie, that would be great. that we try not to have crosstalk during check-ins because we want everyone to feel as if they kind of have the floor. It's their space to share what's been going on with them. And then whoever is willing to go next, sometimes we go in a circle. And of course, I like to remind people that you don't have to check in if you don't want to. Of course, we prefer it, and I do encourage people to at least say your name. But we tend to really enjoy hearing from people, and the nervous ones usually go last, and they've kind of absorbed everyone else's check-in, and then they might feel a little bit more comfortable. But if anyone doesn't want to check in, that's totally fine. You can just say pass. And then we can move on to open forum. And Hannah, maybe this is a good opportunity for you to share about open forum.
I would say that also I wanted to note about the check-ins is that in our group, in the Atlanta group, when we're face-to-face, because we go back and forth between in-person and online, I keep notepads around and paper and pen so people can write down their thoughts or questions about other people's check-ins. And then we have like a time where you can respectfully ask or respond to check-ins after everybody's had a chance to share. But you asked me to share about open forum. So this is kind of a time where people can discuss whatever is going on. Sometimes there will be one topic that's brought up that'll keep the whole meeting going, and then other times it'll be a bit more challenging to keep that conversation running. But it's really good for support group leaders to have, and you can gain access through TLC, through each other, to have a running list of topics that you can refer back to.
It's always nice to have that on hand, even as a seasoned group leader. A couple of times the group is just very quiet, and sometimes you feel like you kind of have to carry the conversation. One of the things I would say is that it's really nice sometimes just to let it be silent. Some people that wouldn't have shared in the first place, if you just let the space sort of take over, they might be open to sharing. The other thing I like to do is if it's very quiet, I like to say, I like to make sure that I don't over participate, and I give new people here a chance to chime in and ask questions. Because sometimes if you're just newly dealing with the BFRB, or if you just figured out what it was, it could be pretty scary. And so you might want to just get basic information. So we're all here to share. Yeah, and so open forum usually takes over the rest of the time. And one thing that I want to mention is, as you're assessing your readiness and you're choosing your format, some of the other things that you want to think of might be, how long is our group? This group or this session today is only an hour, but typically if you have 5 or more members, you'll definitely need 90 minutes. And sometimes if your group is really taken off and there's like a lot of energy, then the group can go over. And I know this because I've had to make a lot of tea for a lot of people who decided to stay. So yeah, I would just say give yourself enough time. Figuring out what the format is. So there are various places that you can also lead a 12-step group, and for that, you'd need to see some additional readings, which we have on our website at bfrb.org. So the other thing I would say is this is the hardest part about starting an in-person group, and it's finding a place. And we would love to be able to help you find a place. We have a list of resources that might help, but we won't actually be able to go to your hometown and sign an agreement and, contribute funds. We are a nonprofit and we're a referral center, but we're not going to hunt down space for you. Some of the places that we like to rely on are libraries. And as you consider a space, you might also want to think about privacy, because a lot of members won't feel comfortable meeting at a Starbucks or meeting, in an open library without a closed door. You can also check out churches. Sometimes there are co-working spaces, but you might have to get a little creative. I know when I was working at the University of California at Berkeley, I was using the conference room there, but that's because I was a staff member there. So if you are an employee, you might want to ask about having conference space donated. You might have to go through various administrative channels for that, but finding a space is generally the toughest. It's something that can take a lot of time. So when you email TLC and you say, I'm ready to start a group, the other thing I always say is, okay, your first group will probably be in about 3 months. So take some time, read through the materials that we'll send you, figure out a game plan, and then we can iterate as much as possible.
I want to piggyback on what you said about privacy. That's really important in finding a space, but also accessibility. And you've got a lot of anxious people meeting in one place, and it's like parking. So the Atlanta group, we started at a park, like at a public park with not the best parking, and it was really challenging to get all these people together in this pavilion, and parking was a mess, so it deterred some people from coming. So we had to readjust, and then a lot of this is constantly just you as a leader having to assess and then reassess the needs of your group and your abilities.
Yeah, I remember when I was facilitating for the New York City group, we met at a school, and that required once a year, everyone had to fill out their name and address. And there are people that do not want to share that information. They might be in a very different place with their behavior. They might not be as open as other people are. So you always have to remind yourself to be sensitive to those folks and to provide as many opportunities for them as possible. The other thing I wanted to mention was when you said accessibility, you do want to remember that BFRBs do not discriminate, not just across mental health disorders, but also physical abilities. So wherever you are, make sure that everyone can access your space and that it's not difficult to get to for people with different abilities. So just a quick side note. So finding a location, setting the date is kind of like setting your wedding date, except it can change because you're the leader of your group. So the best date to make groups is not when people aren't working. It's not when, school is out. It's not on a Sunday evening before. It's really just the best time and date that works for you. My favorite time and date is when I'm home, I'm finished with work, and I know that I can sort of click into that headspace. Don't set a time and date that you might need to change, or if you do like team sports, you're not going to be available. The thing that you really need in the beginning of your group's existence is stability, and you want to be able to pick a time that feels accessible to you, and you don't have to run a group every week. And if that feels like too much of a commitment, run the group once a month or run it once every other month. Even if you're living in a much more like rural place, or you tried running group more frequently and there aren't many people, run the group less frequently. It'll incentivize those to come out and potentially participate more if the group is offered less. I think that's just part of economics, unfortunately. So set the date. Definitely make sure that if you want to have TLC promote your group, that you come up with a group description. And part of that is who is allowed to go to your group. So maybe, I only allow adults that are typically 17 and older. And that's because part of the adult conversation about BFRBs does involve like sex and relationships and picking places that we wouldn't want to talk about in front of children. And I've had a lot of phone calls from parents asking why certain things were discussed. So as the leader, I just chose to not deal with that anymore because it's too much of a headache. Starting a group is hard enough, and you want to be able to have as little hassle as possible. Hannah, did you want to say anything else about who's allowed to come to your group, parents, people without loved ones?
So this has been definitely one of the most challenging parts for me about running a group, because I just want to help all the people, everybody. I think that everybody deserves support and everybody should have access to support, but it took a lot of time for me to realize that I can't be that support person for everybody, and that my group can't be, because having small children and older adults in the same group and as parents can get messy. topics, as Amy said, topics are addressed that may not be appropriate for certain ages, and also different people are looking for different things. And so it's really important to be able to, again, like assess the needs of your group. Like, who do you want to, like, what does your area need? What can you provide? And who would best benefit from your group?
Yeah, and it might be sometimes that you don't have a lot of people interested, and you get a lot of parents, even though originally you wanted to host an adult group. In which case, yeah, you might want to have a group for parents and kids, or you might want to have a group for parents and kids where you have a co-host, and a co-host might be better with the kids and you might be better with the parents, and you can split them up. That's one way of doing it. Other times you will have parents that think that they have the answer to why their children pick or pull, or they take an approach that feels harsh, and it's difficult to communicate ways of helping your child with their child right in front of them. So if you're lucky and fortunate enough to have enough parents or enough people with BFRBs, strategically choose who your group is for. I will tell you that leading a group for kids and teens is very different than leading a group for adults, and leading a group for parents is even harder. I'm not a parent, but I'm lucky to have a buddy with me that who is a parent. That's a wonderful host. TLC hosts parent support groups and kids and teens groups online, so please check those out. If you get any phone calls when you're starting to set up your group, definitely recommend that parents and teens and even adults attend an online group. It's a wonderful way to sort of get settled into the idea of vulnerability, disclosure, and sharing, which is what makes the magic work. I know that I've tried a million different ways to kick my BFRB, and the one thing that has consistently been 100% positive are support groups. I know we talk about SCAMP and COMB, and I always add on an S onto the end for support, or social support. So by the way, just we're almost at halfway time. I know that this is a lot of information, and it's good that it's being recorded, and but if you do have any specific questions about starting a group or running an online group, I'll get to that in the second half, but please just add your questions into the chat box. Or if you have any suggestions, we can talk about how to redirect people that like to talk all the time, or how to deal with difficult populations and things like that. It does require, Hannah and I joke around, like, it requires two different personalities. So if you have two people, if you have someone that you trust and have a relationship with, someone you can give and get feedback from, it would be a great idea to have like a second in command. You can be an introvert and host a group as long as you have someone that can enforce the rules. And it would be good just to make sure that you can focus on holding the space for people, allowing them to share, while someone else is taking care of actually making sure that people are following the rules, not having to think about, what if I interrupt this person? What if I say, hey, that's hurtful, can you please not say that again? I always like to give people the benefit of the doubt and operate in good faith that maybe they just don't come from a place where they understand. So oftentimes, if that happens, I'll have to just pull someone aside after group. Or a good way to redirect that, honestly, is, I can maybe go off, I can talk about someone's check and be like, hey, I had a question about what you said earlier, and just redirect the conversation, taking any sort of spotlight or focus off of the person who's maybe not being so helpful. So Hannah, anything that I missed so far? Anything that we'd like to highlight?
I want to highlight the significance of having multiple people like co-facilitating a group. I found that in the group here, once we started having some challenges, there was one person in the group who really was like willing to chat with me about it and work through it, and and be like a moderator for the group. So she would be the timekeeper. She, like, establishing roles is significant and helpful. And I didn't have that for a little while. So there was a lot of uncertainty. But starting the kids and teens group and working with the adults group, I feel like we have now these systems put into place, and having different, like you said, different personalities and different skill sets, and people who are assigned to certain duties and are also very just flexible. Flexibility is huge in hosting a support group.
One of the other things I wanted to mention, there are some really important things to keep in mind. And, you know, I've had a BFRB for a really long time. It's been 22 years. And if you asked me 10 years ago what success or recovery looks like, my answer would be very different than what it looks like today. So just like we don't have one treatment or one cure for BFRBs, you have to understand that some people come from a place of acceptance and commitment, and some people want to just eradicate the behavior. But it's human nature to judge people based on their appearance. So sometimes you have hair pullers, sometimes you have skin pickers. It may look perfect, but that's not always the case, as we know. We're all excellent makeup artists, and picking out, designating fashion so that we can cover up some of the stuff we're not so happy about. But regardless of anyone's appearance, all of the people that live with BFRBs have had similar feelings and experiences. So, you know, going back to what I said, some of us want to stop, and some of us are content just living with a BFRB. Some of us have already stopped, and that doesn't mean that we don't share the same feelings, experiences, or ideas. It just means that we tackle them in different ways. So, you know, be wary. I remember when I first started coming to group, I was very strict on, I never want to do this again. And, you know, I took a big step, and I shaved all my hair off like a year and a half ago. And now I'm telling you, I could care less if I had eyebrows or eyelashes. It just doesn't feel like the same kind of burden. And maybe that'll change one day too. But I think right now it's good to just have the person in your group, and yourself even, just focus on, you know, like, how am I treating my body? Does it feel like pretty balanced right now? Do I feel happy with my success? Am I being too hard on myself? Like, if, you know, how would I give advice to other people? Part of that process that you usually go through in therapy is, it's a great reason to host a group. It is so rewarding. It teaches you how to talk nicely to other people. And the more you get into that habit, the more it's likely to rub off on you. So if you're someone that's very hard on yourself, I know, of course, none of you are, but if you're very hard on yourself, having a group and listening to other people who have been in similar painful places, and having you give them advice and listen to how other people give advice to them, it can be very, very self-rewarding and soothing just by being in group. It's also a great way to not pick or pull or scratch or bite for the amount of time that you have group. I always like to remind people of that at the end of the support groups that we conduct. And, you know, I think it's reasonable to ask, you know, for this period of time, we ask that you try really hard not to engage in that behavior, because it can be triggering for other people as well. So again, like, when you're thinking of the rules and the format of your group and who's coming, make sure you think about how you might deal with some of these situations. You know, what if you have someone that can't stop pulling out their hair? You know, how is that going to feel for you? Is that okay for you? Things like that. So let's see. Does anyone have any questions so far? I don't think so. Yes, exactly. So the other good thing, thank you, Jane, I appreciate it. It's really great to have fidgets at your group. So I've definitely had dental floss. I have a huge bowl of candy, which I know is not great because sugar is not a basic, but I always have little tiny things to fidget with, like right here, you know, just something that you can put on top of your fingers, or Band-Aids, or sometimes just string. I used to have koosh balls, or balls with yarn that I would make, like from Etsy. It's just good to have something. I also have a lot of like interesting sensory things around my house. So things like this, or stuffed animals. It's really helpful just to have something to play with, so that you can you can let your brain actually pay attention while your body stays busy. Let's see. All right.
We also have like mega sensory opportunities at our group too. And then on the online groups, we just encourage we encourage everybody at the beginning of the meetings to, grab their favorite fidgets or whatever they need to keep, and water, whatever they need to stay in one place and just like be able to be for however long your meeting is. Also, we have another question. As a group leader, do you feel that you are less able to share your own experiences because you need to be in a constant supportive role? Our answers might be different, but my answer to that is no. I find myself sharing my experiences often, and that's how I connect with other people, is through empathy. It is the best tool that I can recommend for support group leaders. Sometimes I'll sit back and wait, but people you're there to connect with other people, and to help eliminate or minimize those feelings of isolation and shame and everything that comes with having a BFRB. So I think that sharing experiences enhances, but it's different to share experiences than to say, this is what is right, this is what I did, this is what worked, because it's not a one size fits all kind of deal. What has worked for me at different times in my life, like different things have worked at different points in my life for me. And I'm sure that what works for me may not work for somebody else, but I don't have a problem sharing. I'm very open about it.
So to answer your question, I never really have a problem speaking up, but definitely I've found myself lately when I hold larger groups, I try to stay quiet more. And one of the good things to remember when you're facilitating is that, sometimes the group can be pretty awkward and quiet, but if the group is lively and if you hit that sweet spot where it's so quiet and then someone chirps up, because as the facilitator, there's a power dynamic there. And so you want to make sure to distribute all that power to the members, because the group wouldn't be what it is without them. So if you have people that are, in larger groups that are talking and really getting something out of it, I love, love, love the 2 ears, 1 mouth approach. So maybe I'll stop in at difficult times. And I want to segue my answer also to someone else's question, which is they'd be interested in hearing how to help people who are convinced that they're never going to get better and who believe that any strategies won't be able to help. I love people like that. They're particularly difficult, and I like those situations. We had some people like this back on the East Coast who came, and, we try as much as possible, even when people are RSVPing online, we basically prime them and say, this is meant to be a positive, supportive, peer-led environment. And that is exactly how I redirect some of that conversation. We've had a lot of doom and gloom, and when I say doom and gloom, I don't mean people with severe chronic depression. I mean people that are like, this problem is never going to go away. And, I would challenge them and say, well, then, what do you hope to get out of today's session? Because you're here for a support group. So I'm assuming that you're either here to provide support for other people or you're here to get some support. So if you truly believe that nothing can help you, let's test out the validity of that, because it seems like you're trying to help yourself. So it's really easy to get stuck in this sense, in thinking that, oh, I've tried everything. I've tried CBT, I've tried DBT, I've tried N-acetylcysteine, I've tried inositol, I've tried drugs and alcohol, I've tried all sorts of stuff. I've tried doing everything and nothing works. Well, it's probably because there's a corner of research that maybe you haven't checked out, and maybe you've never been to a support group before. And this might just able to share your experiences with other people who recognize you from the inside, maybe that is what you need. So I would say kudos to them for showing up and doing the brave, vulnerable thing. And, you know, I would even venture to like check in after and say, hey, how did that feel for you? Did that feel like a little bit of a burden lifter? You know, like tell me, you know, always ask for feedback. That's the other piece of this that I love to give other group leaders is, you know, we would not grow or make mistakes or come up with better solutions if we didn't get feedback in some way or another. And feedback can be difficult to give sometimes, but it's really necessary for other people's growth. So if you think about it in that altruistic sense, you know, you actually have to speak up to help other people see broader solutions and to course correct their behavior, especially in the case where they're doing something harmful or inadvertently limiting the discussion in your group because of such an overwhelmingly negative attitude. And it's been a lifetime struggle for me to think positively. I have to fight that all the time. I'm also just very cynical, but it's, you know, being around positivity, now I find myself, it's so much easier for me to exude that because I've taken so much of it in. That's the other benefit about being a group leader. It looks like we have a few more questions. Okay, so for Zoom sessions, yeah, so let's jump into, you know, online groups and offline groups and what are the differences. So I just started running online groups in October, and it's hard. Surprise, you actually have to do a lot of the work. So besides figuring out all of the steps and are you ready and, you know, what time is the group going to be and what's the format, you actually have to set up an email. You know, you have to set up something that people can email you and say, hey, like, what's the deal with this group? And so what I think is really helpful is to choose a platform that you're going to use. It could be Zoom. It could be Google Hangouts. I recommend that you research each platform that you're looking at to see which features are free and which aren't. Oftentimes we have a group leader in Boston who really wanted to host her own group online, and the account was like $150, and just sending out an email, she got donations in like minutes. So people actually really want to help. It's cheaper than therapy. Definitely. It's like a tiny cost compared to one therapist session. So you can think of it like that. Zoom, though, as we're using it, so Zoom does have certain limitations in the free version and the pro version. So only a certain number of people can meet for a certain period of time in the basic version. The features as you pay more unlock. So TLC is happy to share basic accounts as long as you're conducting a group that is in line with TLC's values and mission. Any recommendations of other free platforms? So you do have to decide in the online version of group if you're going to have audio and video required. For my online groups, I do require that. I feel like it creates a sense of togetherness, even though we're not together. And it's important to have that vulnerability when you're sharing and talking about such intimate, personal, private things. But I will toss this over to Hannah because I know that you are great with finding free tools and platforms online. So can you talk about some of the ones that you've used?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So we started out using Tiny Chat, which was a little bit messy. Then Jump in Chat. Jump in Chat's okay. It's free, but depending on different platforms will have different technical challenges. So with Jump in Chat is fine. You create an account, you make your handle it's like Jump in Chat, and then it's whatever you choose your handle to be. And then you can make it so it's push to talk. I'm so used to doing push to talk that I mute every time I don't talk in here. But so that's a fine platform. Google Hangouts has given me some technical challenges, but I know that other people are a fan of Google Hangouts. I've conducted many group calls on Google Hangouts. I will say though that Zoom has been the most reliable platform.
I think Zoom is probably the best one that I've had. I know that especially during times like this where, you know, people are sheltering in place or they're quarantined, bandwidth can be an issue. So one of the big things about having an online group is not just having a welcome email and an RSVP and here's what to expect, but especially for an online group, if you've ever attended one from TLC, it's very important that you flesh out a code of conduct. And that includes being in a safe place where your computer or whatever device you're using is not moving, not because we don't love you and want to hear you shopping, you know, we don't want to disrupt the group. And to be honest, you know, having sessions when other people are moving around or walking, it doesn't really do it. And it kind of throws off the stability of the group. People might feel like they're not being paid attention to, things like that. We do have something in the chat. So how do you require participants to sign confidentiality? That is a great question. And if so, how do you address that with online groups? So one of the things that I want to do, we have about 20 minutes, is I want to take you through some of the things in our code of conduct, because I had to sit down one day and be like, oh goodness, how am I going to run this group? How am I going to control a bunch of, not control, but how am I going to like ask strangers to do things that they may not want to do? So influencing that authority, right? It's like part of the professional package. So immediately in the about section of your code of conduct, you're going to want to give a description that, you know, your space is, if it's free, a free, welcoming, safe online space for whoever your group is for who suffer from BFRBs. Maybe it's just skin picking, maybe it's trichotillomania. We do talk about confidentiality right at the top. So the other thing we discuss right after the about section is that, you know, the group begins promptly at a certain time. And timeliness is so important when you're coming to online meetings that aren't drop-in like a webinar, because if you have to talk for 5 minutes and read the rules in an online group, and you don't have to do that, I embed them in my code of conduct, and I have a force function to know whether or not someone's read them. I'll get to that in a minute. But if you have to introduce yourself and say a little bit about how this is working, or if as the facilitator you have to jump in and help someone with a technical issue right in the beginning, if someone, you know, is 20 minutes late, they're going to miss everyone else's check-ins and they're going to miss the rules. And if it's their first time, that's totally not okay. It's disrespectful to the people who are sharing. It's disrespectful to the people who are holding the space, to you as the support group leader for setting this up. And honestly, I focus so heavily on being on time. I will make an exception on an occasion, and that's why I ask people to text me or email me. And I deal with those cases like on a one-by-one basis. But I say that group will begin promptly at 5 p.m. and you can't join after about 7 minutes, because I can't say all this twice. It's exhausting. And I also don't want you to miss anyone's check-in, because maybe what they'll say will resonate with you. So on Zoom specifically, I have the waiting room enabled. And for this, you need a paid account. A waiting room is great because if we need to do a pre-huddle, Hannah and I can meet and talk about, you know, how many people we're expecting. And then once it hits 5 o'clock or whatever time we're starting, I can hit admit all. And as the host, you have the ability to mute people, unmute people, ask them to start their video if that's a requirement. So being on time is super important. Now, if you're coming to, you know, my house or wherever you hold group, maybe it's okay that they're a little bit late, but it is tricky. So can everyone still hear me? Hannah, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. You just froze on my end. I'm not sure if you froze on anybody else's end. I wanted to add on to that.
It's okay that I'm frozen.
That's okay. Is that, and this goes back to a question that was asked earlier too, but one is that having a mission statement or code of conduct can be such a useful and preventative tool. Somebody asked about if somebody comes into the group and they're really negative, or how to handle these things. It's an opportunity for you as a leader to find ways to turn negative statements or outlooks into positive opportunities, to set goals or offer a different perspective that they might not have. But as far as the
confidentiality part, that's, yeah.
it's,
So go ahead.
No,
no, continue.
I lost my thought. My thought was with time. I've almost felt like I've been mean, because you have to be very strict. And I'm let's help everybody, and not very assertive. And I've learned to be more assertive, and just to be like, we need to please be on time. Like, this is very significant. It's hard to start on time and stop on time. That's why I like doing this with somebody else, so that we can both hold each other accountable.
Yeah, and it's also, so getting back to the main question, which I know this is a very long-winded answer to it, but the confidentiality is truly up to each of us. There is no way to like two-factor auth encrypt the conversation. This conversation specifically is being live streamed, but you want to make sure that, you know, during group, no one has their phones out. If you need to take a phone call, you can designate an area and a way to do that at the beginning of group. For an online group, what I do is I don't require an authentication sign up. I require a sign up on our website, and I manage all of that, the backend data that goes into our database. They can sign up that way. The other way that I did it in our in-person groups is I make an email, and I make sure that I'm the only one with the password to that email, and you don't have to share any of your information there. But you will need a way for someone to join a Zoom room. They can join through an email address. They can make a fake account. It's always good to give people an out in case they don't want to give you their true identity. You will encounter a lot of people that are paranoid about things like this. And, you know, how do we know that the group isn't being broadcasted? And, you know, sometimes I've had to link people to like safety and privacy at Zoom and what their practices are. But I'm pretty well versed in data privacy and protection. So, you know, this group, I would get a notice if it was being recorded, and I would be able to see who's recording it. And I would quickly remove that person or bounce them back to the waiting room. I've never had to do that, luckily, because I do make it enough of a pain in the butt to get into the group. And so going back to the code of conduct, we talk about the format and what the requirements are. So requirements are, you have to use audio and video. It has happened a bunch of times where people just call in and they're hoping that I don't notice, but that's not the case with me. So I'll sometimes say, hey, I see that someone's dialed in using their phone. Are you comfortable turning on video? And if I don't hear back after a minute, I say, you know, thank you so much for being here in the beginning. It's very brave of you. Hopefully you'll be able to come back to the group next time feeling a little bit more comfortable, you know, and I'll bounce them back to the waiting room because you've read the code of conduct. The way that I get to enforce the code of conduct, it's an important part of it, because you can write 10 pages and no one's going to read anything. You're just going to scroll to the end and hit I agree. So I make it pretty clear that if you reply with I understand, that's not going to get you into the group. Keep in mind that ensuring that creates work on your part. So every time someone signs up for a support group, they get the code of conduct, they get the requirements, they have an email address, they're told to test out the app like a couple minutes before. If they need technical help, I go ahead and assume that burden, and I'll talk to them, and I'll make sure that I'm working with them, that there is a clear line of communication so that you'll know that you helped the person get into the group to get more help. It is a nice thing to do. Not everyone's comfortable with that. Again, so like, you know, if Hannah wasn't comfortable with that and she could rely on me, it's a nice way to to delegate, right? And to always have a potential succession plan. You want to make sure that in the case that you won't be able to make it because you're going on a fellowship and you're leaving the country for a couple of months, you want to know that the group that you've worked so hard to maintain is going to be it's in good hands. So always thinking about succession planning and who could possibly take over for you is something to keep in the back of your mind. More requirements: make sure you're in a quiet place with a reliable internet connection. If we can't hear you, I know that's kind of funny because I froze, but there's a lot of bandwidth in my house right now, so apologies. And then also we make a note about discussing things like suicide, because many of us have had thoughts and actions like that, right? And we just note that BFRBs can often co-occur with other mental illnesses like substance abuse and ADHD and depression and anxiety and all sorts of stuff. But we ask that you keep these conversations not just primarily related to BFRBs, but we ask that you please not discuss our stuff with other people. It's actively harmful to the group to discuss other people's personal experiences outside of the group. The privacy and the confidentiality is what makes the group work, because when people feel safe and secure, they're willing to disclose and be vulnerable, thereby reducing the shame and isolation that they oftentimes feel profoundly when they have BFRBs. So keeping confidentiality, I remember I used to say it at the top of every group, like, you know, what you say stays here, and we ask that you not repeat it to anyone else. I've also had, I've met people like in real life, outside of group who I've met in group, and they're like, they don't know I have this. And I'm like, cool, we met at a yoga class. You know, you might want to check in if you think that you might run into someone. Oh yeah, we met at this online like webinar, you know, or like, yeah, we met in a coffee shop. Just always make sure that you check in with someone, especially if you're going to a party. A lot of the support group people in my house, like, we've become friends, to be honest. BFRBs are a really great way of making friends, believe it or not. So just make sure that you check in and, you know, sort of get the lay of the land. It would be really unfortunate to have like your secret blown if you're not someone who's more open about their BFRBs. I do have other sections in the Code of Conduct regarding respect and inclusivity. Also, I think Hannah mentioned this, but I'm willing to share all of this information with you. You can look at the template and you can adapt it. We also ask, just so that I don't have to assume so much of this burden, that you resolve conflicts peacefully, right? Like, if you see anyone violating this code of conduct, we urge you to respectfully dissuade them from that behavior. Online specifically, you can send them a private message. We will send private messages to people and say, hey, you know, I see that either you're not paying attention, or, you know, it feels like you're being really aggressive right now. Do you mind taking a pause for a few minutes? Please give someone the chance to participate. That would be great. And then obviously include consequences. You know, I've had to ask someone to leave group in person once, and it was many, many years ago. But it can come with a chat after group, right? Like, I noticed that your behavior actually made a few people uncomfortable, and I want to talk to you about that. And sometimes that's a cultural thing, so you have to be mindful. And then the best part about the code of conduct is the acknowledgement section. So how do you actually get someone to agree to all these rules? And so if you look on the website to any of these RSVP mechanisms, people will sign up and just assume that they're gonna go. But this is a little weird to put it this way, but you have to like dangle a carrot. So in order to get the link to the meeting, you have to go through another step, right? We want people who are motivated and also committed to agreeing and upholding these rules. So somewhere in the code of conduct, for us, it's usually in the in summary part. We say, you know, if you've read and you agree to all these rules, please respond with a passphrase. And then once people respond with that passphrase, I add them to a Google Calendar, or I send them the link. And that seems to work really well. For the first like 6 months, I've been really motivated. And if people haven't responded, I'll say, hey, you know, I've noticed that you didn't respond. Did you happen to catch a keyword in the code of conduct? Hint, it's near the end. Some people are like, whoa, thanks, I didn't recognize that. And some people are like, I understand and I agree to the rules. And, sometimes I'll write back and say, not quite. There's something I think you may be missing. It's at the end. And honestly, those are tough decisions, because if they don't give you the word, you might want to follow up with them. Maybe they'll have like a reading disability or some cognitive complications. So maybe, hey, are you open to a phone call? If you're willing to do that, again. But if they don't give you the keyword or the passphrase, definitely I would say, as a leader, you have to protect your group and you have to protect and enforce confidentiality. And this is one of those ways to do it. And then it's great, because if you get the same 10 people coming every month, they know exactly where the passphrase is. And, it's a lot of work in the beginning, but over time it goes down, right? We're flattening the curve. So I hope that was helpful. I'm very tired of talking. Hannah, do you have anything that you'd like to add? Or it looks like there's a question in there. With regarding webinars, does the Zoom basic account have functionality? No, it does not. In fact, so you can find all this information on Zoom, but you can have a Zoom Pro account, and the webinar feature is extra. So webinars and meeting rooms are different. Meeting rooms are, audio, video, that's totally fine. Webinars, you're able to live stream them, record them, and basically the attendees don't have to like show their face. They can participate using chat, but it's more of a platform for educational things that you want to record or stream out to large groups of people. Meeting rooms are typically a little bit smaller. People can have audio, video. Again, as the host user on the Zoom platform, I would encourage you to go to the features section, the advanced settings. It'll ask you to log in online and you can play with all of their settings. There's a ton of them. We have a question from my favorite person. Hi, Ruya. Do you recommend having a host in either case? We don't have a specific host in our group in Switzerland, and we're kind of doing it all together. There's a center organizing all the administrative bits. That's wonderful. I'm very jealous. But I feel like having a leader would give more structure. What is your experience? Hannah?
I think that having a host can be beneficial. I would say it's more beneficial than kind of like a lax. It gives you structure, a little bit of structure, and especially for people who aren't used to talking about it or who don't feel fully comfortable talking about it, it's helpful to kind of have somebody to facilitate that conversation.
I think, you don't need a leader. It's good to have a group of people. Maybe it's just the first couple people that showed up to group, and you assume the responsibility of picking up, slower times in the conversation. I think having a leader is someone, you can also rotate leaders. That's the other thing I was going to mention about the format of your group. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, if you have like seasonal depression, you don't really want to do this in the wintertime. So when you're starting a group, make sure that, if there's this one motivated person who's like, yeah, I'm going to come every week, this is amazing. You're like, okay, great. I know that you're just coming in as an attendee, but there might be a few months during the year that I can't do it. Would you be comfortable hosting during those times? Or I know some groups, they just print out the rules on a sheet and then they just pass the sheet around and someone reads the rules differently and no one kind of facilitates. It's a little bit more amorphous, but it really does work. And typically the people who are more confrontational will tend to like course correct, not always for the better, by the way. But, in that situation, when you have no real leader or facilitator, it's kind of like, if you see something, say something. And if you feel like something is off, be the one to change or ask someone to say it for you. That's my best advice there.
I have a couple other quick things that I wanted to mention, if that's okay. I have a couple of other things that I just wanted to mention to potential support group leaders. One is that often the hardest part of all of this is getting started. It's a lot of decision making, which can be extra challenging for individuals who are indecisive. myself. But the outcome and the impact you have makes all of the challenges worth it. And also, what has been extremely helpful is that is having access to so many resources through TLC, and this includes utilizing the knowledge and experience of the support group leader mentors and other support group leaders, and attending other online meetings to see how they're run, and asking questions. But TLC will also send you, as a support group leader, different resources. So if you wanted to do community outreach, or if you needed some advice, like somebody didn't want to go get a haircut, like, here, walk in with one of these cosmetologist packets, have a conversation. They're also good resources to educate others. They're educator brochures, they're just general brochures, booklets, and little books. Like, it's unlimited. TLC has amazing resources, and they really want to help work with support group leaders.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that just came up in the chat is like, okay, how do we get them? That's, I don't know if we skipped over that, but TLC, not only do we have support group leader mentors, but we do monthly Zoom calls just like this, where we all get together from around the country and around the world, honestly. And we're like, okay, I have no one coming to my group, or I have 7 RSVPs and they all bailed, and someone's like, wait, you do RSVPs? What? Is that a thing? So we do have those monthly calls. If you are interested in starting a support group, I recommend that you email me. So you can either email Amy at BFRB.org, or you can also email TLC group leaders at BFRB.org. And there are a few of us that check that email, and we take responsibility for getting in touch. We have support group mentors from each of the time zones in the US. And some of us are night owls, so we might even be able to help people in other countries. But I strongly recommend that you get in touch either with Amy, get in touch with me at amy@bfrb.org. I'm sure you probably all have my phone number. You can text me if you don't remember. And then you can also email TLC group leaders at bfrb.org, and we can get you all set up and started. So if there's no other questions, we're definitely at time. So thank you all so much for coming. Hannah, honestly, I wouldn't be able to do any of this without you. It's so nice to have a buddy. Very, very grateful for you being here. And thank you all so much for attending.
I feel the same. Thank you very much.